Hey guys, I'm Liz Diddy. For those of you who don't know me, I'm on the teaching team here at Westgate, and our family calls this campus South Hills our home. So if I don't know you yet, I would love to meet you out in the courtyard afterwards, even if I have never met you. I bet I know something about you. I bet that if you are anything like me, or like any other human in this room, you probably also do not like the most unlikable thing ever, which is waiting. Now, some people would say if you really want to test your limits in waiting, you should head to like the DMV. I would put forward that airports are a much better place. Some of us found ourselves back in airports again this summer for the first time in a while, and we realized that we've been lying to people when we say we like to travel, because we do not like to travel. Traveling stinks. We like to be on vacation, we like to go places, but we don't like to travel. So, because of COVID, traveling has gotten even trickier than before. But I decided to take my 2 kids this summer to go to Florida and visit my grandma. She's had some health issues, and because of COVID, we hadn't been able to get out there sooner, so we thought we would just take a little extra sunshine to the Sunshine State. But I didn't realize that because of COVID, they weren't going to feed us on the 5-hour flight to Atlanta. And then I didn't realize that because of COVID, when we got there, all of the restaurants in our terminal would be closed. And that then, because of COVID, the only food in the entire Atlanta airport would be in the food court, where every other traveler in the Atlanta airport had gone to eat. And that, because of COVID, those fine food establishments were having a really hard time hiring people who wanted to expose themselves to germs from every corner of the United States. And so they were all super understaffed, and every line was impossibly long and unbearably slow. I kid you not when I tell you there were more than 100 people waiting for nuggets at Chick-fil-A. So I grabbed my kids and I got into the shortest line for probably the worst food. But I didn't care because it seemed like we could maybe get to the front of it before our plane left. Now here's the thing, there is some waiting that is just boring and slow. That's DMV waiting. That's the kind of waiting that Candy Crush was made for. But there is some waiting that is like pressure cooker waiting. Like, my flight is leaving in 20 minutes from a different terminal, and I have 2 kids who are both hungry and need to go to the bathroom, and there are 20 people in front of me for this burger place that doesn't even look good kind of waiting. Like, I'm waiting to hear back from that recruiter kind of waiting. Like, I haven't gotten a text back from that person, and every minute that goes by kind of makes it feel less likely sort of waiting. That high pressure waiting. And so I am standing there, and I promise you, I was on the same tile of that food court for 7 straight minutes. And I can prove it because I was obsessively checking my watch every 30 seconds, and I did not move until all of a sudden, the heavens opened, and everyone who was standing in front of me walked away. And I moved 10 yards in 10 seconds to the very front of the counter, and I was ready to order a burger faster than I have ever ordered a burger before. And the lady looks me in the eyes and she said, "Sorry, we're out of food. We just closed." Oh, no! So, I grab my 2 kids, and there is a newsstand on the corner. And I pull the biggest panic move I have ever pulled. And I tell them that they can pick out any 3 things that they can find in that store for dinner, which meant that my kids ate Pringles and Cheez-Its and Starbursts for dinner. But it was all I had. It was the only option that was in front of me. And I knew it wasn't the best, but there was nothing else I could do. And so we ran like home alone to our terminal, barely made our flight, but it was worth it for this moment on the other end. For the first hugs in 3 years. And it was worth the wait. But as stressful as my waiting story is, I have nothing on Abraham and Sarah and their waiting story that would in the end be over 25 years long. So if you've been with us for the last few weeks, you know that we're going through the life of Abraham, and we're looking at his example as a field guide for loving God. And this week, we're going to look specifically at how in Abraham's story, we find a way to trust God even when it doesn't make sense. Now, we are going to get thrown into one of the darkest parts of Abraham's story today. And we are going to have to sit in the hopelessness that he and Sarah felt. Because God told Abraham, remember last week, leave, go somewhere new, do something big. And Abraham said yes. But now he did that. And he's been on this big adventure with God for 10 years. And he's trusted God's promises that he would have a son and that there would be a nation and that he would have a great name and that there would be this blessings, except he left home and he did his part. But now instead of being on an adventure with God, they're just in the desert 10 years later. Has God forgotten them? Has he forgotten his promises? Is he a God who keeps those? What were they thinking? And I can just imagine Sarah in the tent. And every time Abraham makes some innocent comment about well, when we have a son, and she knows that her body cannot have a child anymore. It reminds her of that in 100 different ways. She has been standing stuck on her food court tile for over a decade. And every minute that passes not only makes it less likely, but she is beyond it being impossible. And she must be torn when she sees that smile on Abraham's face, to want to hope with him, and to also want to scream because she knows the truth. And so Sarah is going to pull her panic move. It's not a great option, but there's nothing else going on move. And it is going to explode. And people are going to get hurt. And as horrible as all of it is going to be, we all have to admit that we've given up on God before too. Especially when the thing that he dared to make us hope for becomes impossible. When every unarguable fact and gut feeling that we have says that we are not on an adventure with God anymore. We are in this alone. That is the birthplace of Sarah's plan. Turn with me to Genesis 16, 1 through 4. It'll also be on the screen. Oh, thank you. Now Sarah, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children." So we all know, we're clear whose fault this is. "Go, sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abraham agreed to what Sarah said. So after Abraham had been living in Canaan for 10 years, Sarah, his wife, took her Egyptian slave, Hagar, and gave her to her husband to be his wife. And he slept with Hagar, and she conceived. And when she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. This story is really wrong. This story is going to make us wonder why Abraham's name is on the cover of our book about how to love God well. This story sounds a lot less like a clean Bible story that has a great message at the end, and a lot more like the dark world of The Handmaid's Tale. It is horrible. It's horrible. It's so messy and so wrong. And here's the thing that we have to remember about Abraham. God doesn't write stories just for perfect people. And God doesn't need perfect stories to show up. Abraham is a mess. Sarah is a mess, and they create a massive mess. But if there is hope for these real humans to move from skepticism and hopelessness into trust, there might just be hope for us and our messiness and our mistrust too. But this story, even by ancient standards, is bad. And the author knows it's bad. We know that from the way that he tells it. He uses a literary design pattern. That sounds really fancy, doesn't it? But you guys know what this is, because movies have design patterns too. It's what makes them predictable. So let's say, for example, you turn on the Hallmark Channel around Christmas time. And a girl from the small town who had gone off to the big city is home for Christmas. Is she going to meet a boy? Are they going to annoy each other at first and then fall in love? Will an old flame from the big city come and threaten to interrupt it all? Will she choose her humble hometown love over the rich, successful big city guy? I had told this story to Lindsay, and she highly suggested that we have a scene where they get stuck in the snow. So I am really open to suggestions for our little screenplay here. But you guys see how predictable that this is, right? And so there's another pattern in the Bible that is really just as predictable. It's the pattern of see, desire, and take. It actually, if you are familiar with the story of the Bible, it shows up really early in some of the first few pages. Anyone think of where we see this? In Eden, that's right. Okay, so we see in Genesis 3:6 that when the woman Eve saw the fruit of the tree was good and pleasing to the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some and ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. So Eve saw the fruit. She wanted the wisdom, and it didn't hurt that it was a good-looking fruit. And then she took the fruit. And we see this pattern repeated over and over again. It always leads to something bad. It's actually in Sarah's story. The words are a little bit less obvious, but let's go back to those verses we read earlier. Remember that Sarah, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children, but she had an Egyptian slave named Hagar. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go and sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." Abraham agreed to what Sarah said. So after Abraham had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarah, his wife, took her slave Hagar and gave her to her husband. Sarah sees. She doesn't see Hagar, does she? She sees her slave. She sees a young womb that she dehumanizes, does not recognize in the image of God, that she commoditizes, that she wants the family that can come through it, and she takes it and gives it to her husband. Sarah's not the first or last person to fall into this pattern. We actually see this throughout the Bible. Another famous example is when David sees Bathsheba and he wants her and he takes her. And it goes again and again and again. People see it, they want it, and they take it. But this pattern may have started in Eden and carried through the Bible, but it never left us. You may or may not have heard Ariana Grande's song, 7 Rings. But whether or not you have heard this song, it has topped the charts in 19 countries globally. It shattered online streaming records, and it is to this day one of the most bought digital songs on the internet. And the chorus goes, I see it, I like it, I want it, I got it. Because that is still the chorus of the human heart. It always has been, and it is still now. And it is celebrated in our culture to be able to see something that you want and just get it. That is valued. But there's a part of the equation that we don't stop and think about, which is what happens after. When we have our own see, desire, and take, whatever it may be, and we don't stop to ask ourselves what we actually want, or if we should have this thing that we're taking, or whether or not this thing that we're grabbing because it's in front of us is really the best thing for us to have. This see, desire, take is actually the pattern of sin. You know, sin, as I was putting this slide deck together, I was like, I just put sin in like 700-point font on a slide. This feels a little off-brand for me. Like, we don't talk about this that often. And here's the thing. Sometimes in our heads, we feel like sin is something that bad people do, and we get these images of like evil people and hell. That's not what sin is. The metaphor, one of the metaphors of sin is of a bullseye. We're going to look at 3 metaphors that are all really helpful for us. See, sin is just missing the mark of God's perfect goodness. And you might be 1 ring out or 2 rings out, or if you shoot arrows anything like me, you may never grace the hay bale. But it is just being away from God's perfect goodness. And when we see, desire, and take what we want on our own, what we're doing is saying that maybe God has a perfect good out there somewhere, but I don't want to find it or wait for it. I'm going to do it my way. In the end, sin is less about bad behavior and more about broken relationship. It's about choosing our own way instead of God's perfect good. It's not being patient or caring at all about what God's perfect good is. It's reactionary. It's what we do when we're panicked and under stress. Sometimes sin is also like a cancer. It starts small and it poisons us. We're going to see this in Sarah's life. Her sin of mistrust is going to take over and make her bitter and unhappy. But sometimes sin is also a grenade. And Abraham and Sarah's sin, it didn't just miss the hay bale. It didn't just affect them. It was like a bomb that went off, and the shrapnel flew, and Hagar was shredded by it. And we all know what it's like to stand too close to the wrong person when their bad decisions explode. And we don't like to admit that we very rarely consider who will be affected by our decisions when we're only thinking about ourselves. Because sin will never only affect us. It won't just make us miss out on what God has for us. It won't just poison us. It will affect the people that are around us. And if I'm honest, there are a lot of times when I feel stuck like Sarah. And my life is not moving. And it hasn't been moving. And the pressure is mounting. And I do not have a good answer for how my running training is going, or when my second book will be written, or how a lot of things that are important to me are going. I've just been standing here. And that's not even a good analogy because I have been running in place and not getting anywhere. And that is when I feel very far away from God's good. That is when God's good just feels like an idea that has nothing to do with my life. That is when I just want to see and take another drink because I just need to relax. That is when I just want to see and take another episode of my favorite show because I'm trying to fall asleep and I'm anxious and I can't make my brain stop spinning. And so I reach for the remote. And that is when I am sitting on the couch next to my kids and I am just scrolling through my phone. Because I want to connect with someone and I just have that in front of me. We all want comfort and pleasure and companionship. Amazon gets that. You see it, you want it, it's on your porch tomorrow. TikTok and Instagram get that. You see it, you want it, swipe up. And sugar and exercise endorphins and porn and outrage politically and shopping and nail sets and whatever else. Someone will always be there to sell us something that we can take right now. And I'm not saying this to shame anybody for watching TV. I watch TV. Netflix has the nerve to try to shame me. Are you still watching? Are you still streaming? TV is fun. The problem is when I go to it because I have a want and a desire to calm my thoughts, and that's what I take instead. What would it look like if instead of grabbing the remote or grabbing whatever it is that we like to grab that's so close on hand, what would it look like if we actually went to God and prayed? I mean, there are times where it just doesn't feel like it's a trust issue. It really does just feel like I want to watch Netflix. But what if I actually prayed and I said, God, the thoughts in my head are spinning right now. I cannot stop thinking about these relationships that need my attention, and my to-do list feels so long. I don't even know how to get to the bottom of it. I know that you have something good for me. Can you show me what it is and give me the courage to wait for it? Because sometimes trusting God is a big yes, like when Abraham left his home country and went to a new spot that he didn't know. But sometimes it is a lot of little no's. No, I will not take things on my own terms. No, I will not define what is good and what is easy. What if trusting God wasn't something that we did when we had a big decision to make? Like where to go to college or where to move or what our next job should be. What if trusting God was something we did every time we were bored or lonely or anxious? What if we believed that God had good for us every day and that we don't have to frantically grab whatever is in front of us? Because just like the boardwalk burger at the Atlanta airport, there is no food there. It cannot satisfy us. We know that, which is why we keep grabbing for more. God has good things, better things for us when we trust him. Trusting is better than taking. It's hard to imagine how. But when we trust God, he has good for us that is better than the good that we can take for ourselves. Do we believe that? Is God good? Can we trust him? Does he have good things for us? Didn't hear you in the back. Yes. Yes. Yes, he does. You can eat Pringles and Starburst for dinner once, but you cannot live that way. Now, here's the good news for us. God does not wait for us to get this equation right, because this is really, really hard. Trusting is really hard, and taking is second nature. God will find us right where we are. And that's what we see in the story of Hagar and of Sarah and Abraham. God finds Hagar in the mess of Abraham and Sarah's sin. God will find Abraham and Sarah in the mess that they have created, and he is still that finding God that finds me and finds us and everyone else with trust issues. He'll find us. Hagar went off into the desert, alone and pregnant, in a time where the desert really was the desert. And it was an incredibly dangerous place to travel, even if you were with an entire caravan. And she was carrying Abraham's unborn child, the child that Sarah had so desperately wanted. But Abraham does not go find her. Sarah does not go to find her. Nobody goes to find her but God. God was not okay with how this all fell out. God finds her. There are only a handful of people in the entire scripture who God appears to personally himself. And Hagar is one of them, one of the first. Let's look in Genesis 16. We'll come back. Hagar is in the desert, and the angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert, and he said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going? Because God doesn't just care about Abraham. He doesn't just care about the people who get their names on books. He doesn't care about just the chosen ones. He cares about anyone who's hurting. The David will tell us this hundreds of years later in the Psalms. He'll testify that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. You know, many of us have maybe been going through this series on Abraham, and we're thinking, yeah, God promised this cool stuff to Abraham, but God didn't really promise me anything. Like, what promise am I trusting for? And this is a promise that Hagar didn't even know she had, but that God kept to her. That God is close to people when they are hurting. That he hears us when we cry. Hagar didn't go to find God. Hagar went out into the desert to die. And completely unseen, unimportant, unsought after, all she did was cry. And God found her. The angel of the Lord said to her, you have conceived and you will have a son. You will name him Ishmael. He will be your son, not Sarah's. His name means God hears, for the Lord has heard your cry of affliction. Listen, if you do not get anything else out of today, here's what you need to know. Listen to what Hagar says. She responds by giving this name to the Lord who spoke to her. You are the one who sees me. She said, I have seen the one who sees me. Do you hear this? This is not a story about God seeing Hagar. Hagar points to God and names him. You are the God who sees. And you have seen me. But he is still the God who sees. And he still sees us. And he still sees you. No matter how hurt you have been by other people, no matter what mess you have made, no matter who has run away from you that you have not yet chased after, God sees you. God cares for you. And he hears you. He has good things. Now, he ends up sending Hagar back to Abraham and Sarah, which is crazy. And don't read this as him sending Hagar back to an abusive situation, because that is not what is happening here. Actually, Dana and Dave Tish and I talk about this on the Afterward podcast, and we don't have time to do that now, but if you listen to that, it's dropping this week. But God does ask Hagar to trust him enough to go back, to do something that does not make sense. Because sometimes trusting God is taking a big step out in faith and going somewhere new that is out of our comfort zone. And sometimes trusting God is staying somewhere that is outside of our comfort zone. And God asks Hagar to do something that doesn't make sense, and she does it. The hero of this story, the one who trusts God when it doesn't make sense, is not Abraham. It is Hagar. And Abraham and Sarah are going to get their own visit from God in about 15 years. And God will visit them in a new way with something new for them. And we'll learn about that, we'll talk about that in a couple of weeks. Nobody wants to be chosen for the kind of waiting that Abraham and Sarah had. Nobody wants to be chosen for a fraction of that kind of waiting. Faith Yuri Cho says that waiting has always been for the chosen ones, the ones called to do the things that only God can do. And if you are stuck waiting and you are feeling unseen, know that the God who sees you right where you are. You are not stuck. You have been chosen. And that thing that feels impossible, whatever it is, you will be surprised the good that God has for you, the miracle that is waiting on the other side if you have the courage to wait. We can trust God, even when it is unbearably slow and impossibly long and it doesn't make sense. He is worthy of our trust. And I don't know what unsolvable problem is facing you today. But I do know that the father of faith had a very hard time trusting God. And so it's okay that it's hard for me to trust God too. And it's okay that it's hard for us to trust God. We need help. Maybe you need help like Sarah and Abraham needed help to trust. Where are you tempted to see and desire and take? What do you actually want? And is it something you could ask God for? Maybe we need help to trust like Hagar. You're hurt. You're lost. Kind of want to go where no one can see you because it's been too long since you cried. Can you believe that God would hear you there? What would it look like for God to show up in your life, to be seen and found by him this week? Let's go ahead and close in prayer. God, we want to trust you. It feels so hard to do sometimes. Help us. Teach us how good trust is and remind us how good you are. Amen.